Welcome to In Confidence, hosted by me, Rosie Dalling. In this podcast series, I speak to people who've been on surprising, often bumpy rides in their quest for personal and professional confidence, and to the experts who can help you get there. Imagine you could banish self-doubt. What if you were sharper, more creative, more original, and with the confidence to strike out in new directions? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Richard Holman is a coach who specialises in the art and science of creative thinking. His masterclass, which he delivers to broadcasters, publishers, and ad agencies, is full of surprising insights from neuroscience and psychology. People say it's like falling down a rabbit hole into a fantastic world of all things creative. What is a creative coach, and who do you help, and how do you help them?
I work with people for whom creativity plays a big part in their lives. So they are creative professionals or they are people with creative ambitions. And the work I do with them is all through the lens of creativity. And I think our creativity is a really fundamental part of who we are as human beings. And I think when our creative selves are misaligned with who we are, that problems arise. And so a lot of the work I do as a creative coach is helping people define and understand who they are creatively, and then sort of align the circumstances of their lives and their work in the best way we can to make sure it fits with that creative personality.
So that brings me to your book, which is called Creative Demons and How to Slay Them. What do you think is the hardest demon to slay, and which one's the easiest?
It kind of depends on who you are, what you're doing, and at which stage you are in the process. And I think the bad news is that all of us are subject to these demons at any given moment. But the good news, and hopefully the conclusion that you took away from the book, is that these demons are actually a vital and essential part of the creative process. And the more we can sort of accept them and acknowledge them and understand them and work with them, the more likely we are to be able to make work and to be able to make good work. And often the impasse people arrive at is when they're battling them. They're going head to head with these demons. You know, they want their work to be perfect or flawless or painless, and it can't be any of these things.
In the book, before the blank page, there's procrastination, isn't there?
That's right, yeah.
There's disappointment, there's
Yes.
failure, there's doubt. Which one do you notice people struggle with the most?
Self-doubt is a big one,
Yeah.
the demon of self-doubt. And I think it's really interesting that you raise the question of confidence in the context of creativity, because it is particularly pertinent to creativity in the creative process. Creativity is all about doing something for the first time, true creativity, pushing the boundaries, making something original. You're going to a place where nobody's ever been before. At least that's what you're trying to do. So it's kind of impossible to be confident that what you're doing is going to work out, because you just don't know. It's different to other fields. So you can be confident about your own process, but you can never be truly confident about the outcome. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about creativity, is the unpredictability of the outcome.
So I can see there why we need to just come to terms with the fact that it's not going to feel easy. Almost like the most important part of the process is just learning to tolerate the discomfort.
Exactly. That's a nice way of putting it. Learning to tolerate the discomfort. The thing to remember, I think, is that often the discomfort is a good sign. So I was reading an interview with Grayson Perry a couple of years ago, and he said, if you don't have self-doubt, you're not trying hard enough, which I think is quite nice. And then there's another great quote, which I love, from the Irish novelist Anne Enright. And she said, only bad writers think their writing is really good. So if you are genuinely trying to make exciting, innovative, meaningful, creative work, you're pushing yourself to a slightly uncomfortable place, because you're pushing yourself beyond the context of what you've already done. You're going somewhere new. And so a little bit of self-doubt and feeling a little bit ill at ease or uncomfortable is a good sign. The problem is it's quite easy for that to tip over into something crippling where it becomes so onerous that you can't move forward with the creative process. And that's often where, one has to help out as a creative coach.
Yeah. So what I'm envisaging is almost like you can have huge creative ambitions, and then the actual practicality of making them come about is can be overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the creative process can often be represented as a sort of U-shaped curve.
Mhm.
So at the start of that is the moment of inspiration when the idea arrives, and you're walking the dog, or you're taking a shower, and suddenly you go boom, wow, that would be a really beautiful thing to do. Now that is often as good as it gets, that moment of inspiration, because the idea is in your head at that point, and so it's a beautiful, unfettered thing. It's untouched by reality. And then you go, okay, how am I going to make this thing? And your spirits on our curve, if time is on the axis along the bottom, the x-axis, and y is your spirits start to take a bit of a tumble because actually this is really difficult,
Mhm.
and sort of self-doubt kicks in, and you go, am I really up to this? Was I just naive to think I had the ability ever to bring this thing to life? But so long as you keep going and you keep working, you sort of bottom out around then, and you just slowly, step by step, word by word, or brushstroke by brushstroke, begin to crawl yourself out of that sort of nadir.
And it's almost recognizing that what you've just described, that is the creative process. That's what's on the menu. And you
Yes,
have to eat it.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, and a really, a reassuring thing. So the Pope died recently, and there's been a lot of talk about what's going on in the Vatican, and the cardinals are going to assemble in the Sistine Chapel. The roof of the Sistine Chapel is arguably the greatest piece of Western art in the history of humanity, an extraordinary rendition by Michelangelo, the Book of Genesis. While Michelangelo was making that extraordinary painting, he wrote a poem to his friend Giovanni di Pistoia. And in that poem, it said, "My painting is dead. I am not in the right place. I am not a painter."
Wow. Huge self-doubt.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And actually, if people can look this up afterwards, but within the sort of panoply of gods and angels and cherubs and all this sort of stuff, there is a self-portrait, and he's portrayed himself as a husk. Michelangelo is there, and he's just flayed skin, because the process of making this was so demoralizing and so draining. And there are countless other examples of great artists and creatives and innovators and thinkers who, in the middle of making something that changed our minds or our perceptions forever, they themselves were riddled with self-doubt. So you're in good company.
Okay. So we're talking there about almost I often find that people come to me in those two phases, either before they've started something, so the self-doubt, can I actually make this happen? And then once they're in some stage into the process, they're thinking, just like Michelangelo, can I ever finish this, and will it ever be any good? So that's the demon of self-doubt. How do you slay it?
Once you've recognized that it's part of the process, a necessary part of the process, and that you're not alone in experiencing this, a really important thing is to understand the difference between creativity and evaluation, to recognize, to separate those two out as separate processes. So creativity, what I mean by creativity is generating stuff, generating the words that will become a story, or making the marks that will become a painting. Evaluation is the editing of those, the sort of alignment of those, the removing anything unnecessary, extraneous, the crafting and shaping. And so what people often do is they conflate the two processes. So they'll sit down to try and write something, and they'll get a couple of sentences in and go, is that any good? And they go, maybe it's not so good. And they go back and they start again. And then they get to the end of the still not working. And before you know it, they're sitting there all frustrated, and they've got loads of scribbled up, ripped up pieces of paper next to them. So the trick is to do a deal with yourself, and you say, okay, I'm going to evaluate what I do, but I'm only going to evaluate it when I've got to the end. And it doesn't matter if the thing that I make is rubbish or scrappy, but I can only make it better once I've got something to work with. You can't edit the blank page. And the only way I got to the end of the book, I'd written a lot of articles, and I'd done a little ebook, but I'd never done a proper book before. And the only way I got to the end of the book was to make that same deal with myself, which is that I'm gonna write this book, and I'm not going to go back to the beginning. I'm not going to show it to anybody. I'm not going to read it to my wife or any of that stuff until I've got to the end, until I've got 25,000 words. And when I've got 25,000 words, even if they're shit, I've got something that I can work with. And so that, I think, is a really important thing to take on board
Yeah.
too.
I've heard you talk about this before, and you explained the neuroscience behind it, because it's explaining about how your brain, we've got two different types of thinking.
The current neuroscientific thinking is that there are different processes that are pertinent to different parts of the creative process. But broadly speaking, there are two that people need to bear in mind. One is called spontaneous thought, and the other is called analytical thought. So spontaneous thought is the kind of thinking that happens when we don't realize we're thinking. So we used to believe that when we were resting, our minds were resting, but actually our minds are quite active when we're not consciously involved in doing anything. So when you're having a shower, or you're walking the dog, or you're washing up, or you're doing one of those sort of slightly mindless activities, then your brain is networking together in all kinds of unpredictable ways. Analytical thinking is this thinking that happens when you sit down and go, right, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. And you engage your prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's executive center, which is also where your inner critic resides. And so a really important learning about the creative process is that you always need to allow the time for spontaneous thought to happen. So the way I think about it is, if you've got a problem that you need to come up with a creative solution for, you sort of engage with the problem intellectually, you have a little bit of a think about it, and then you go off and do something else. Go for a walk or a run, or, clean the windows or polish the car, and get some chores done. But allow that time to for your brain to do a lot of the hard work,
Yeah.
And this is why, this is why people have ideas in the shower. It's why you often wake up with a good idea, because the prefrontal cortex is slow to switch on in the morning. So you're arising from that dream state where your brain's been able to create all these unexpected connections. Really interestingly, the prefrontal cortex is the last part of a child's brain to develop. And so one theory is that the kids are so imaginative because their inner critic is not yet fully switched on.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I've had this happen to me many times when it's almost like I've given my brain an instruction. And then if I'm brave enough to leave it alone, I wake up with the gift of the solution often.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are so many examples of this. From, Einstein would pick up his violin, and Margaret Atwood goes for a walk. One of the things I do with it in the coaching work is help people break down their own process and work out the different phases, building in a little bit of time for spontaneous thought. And then you can have confidence in that process. You can be confident that the process has worked, and so is likely to work again, even if you can never guarantee it. And sometimes people have a process, but they've never sort of stepped back to examine it, think about it, break it down, see which phases they could enhance. Having some time each day where you allow yourself space to be present, to be in the moment. Creativity is about output, it's about the work you produce. And people often neglect input, that in order to generate this beautiful stuff, you need to fill your head with the kind of compost, the raw materials from which great ideas and inspiration can come. I encourage people to just allow themselves a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be much time at all. 5 minutes each day, just to be sort of present and listen and look and breathe, and that can be a great boon to the creative process as well.
Yeah. Interesting, this idea about compost. And is there anything practical you can do with your compost? Because sometimes, not all of us have the best memories, do we? And so we're reading things, but how do we make sure that they actually stay in our brains?
So long as they're there in your unconscious mind, you know, that's okay. And that's kind of where they need to be for your spontaneous thought to work with them. I think rather than being concerned about whether you're retaining things, it's more important to be mindful of the kind of things that you're consuming. So your diet. We're mixing metaphors here, diet and
That's
compost. I
okay.
guess the thing is you put it on your compost heap.
We're being
Um,
creative.
yeah, yeah. So that's about exposing yourself to, deliberately exposing yourself to work from different artists and creators in different mediums. Trying to see new stuff in galleries and listen to artists you might not normally listen to, and watch movies and this kind of thing, to have conversations with people that you might not normally talk to. All this stuff is great compost, great material for your own personal compost heap.
Yeah, some of your demons are also angels. So one of them, for example, that one of the chapters I loved is constraints as a demon. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that and how that might also show up as an angel?
All of us come up against constraints in life and work and in creativity. I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough talent, um, all these kind of things. And it's very easy for those constraints to throw you, and to imagine this sort of perfect environment where there are no constraints and you can just make it a work of unfettered genius. But in fact, researchers have found again and again that the more constraints people experience, the more creative they're forced to become. And the fewer the constraints, the more conventional people seem to be in their ideas. So one way to push your creativity is to deliberately give yourself a constraint. And this will actually force you to think in much more innovative and original ways than you might otherwise have done. Now, you're hit with a limitation, which is painful to begin with, but then rather than let it defeat you, say, well, where could this take me? How might I work with this rather
Yeah.
than against it? And that can often push you into a much more interesting place than you might otherwise have got to.
Yeah, so once again, it becomes almost part of the creative process.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I haven't got time, I haven't got time with the kids and work and stuff to do X. Well, what have you got time to do? You're sitting on a bus for 20 minutes in the morning, so that gives you time to imagine what's going through the head of the person sitting next to you, and that could become the thing that you write. Or you go past the same sort of scene every morning on the bus, and you take a picture at the same time. And
Mm.
that then becomes a library of images. So it's about just working with the circumstances of your life, really, I suppose.
Yes. Okay, so that brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about. So I read an article that you wrote on Substack, and it's called Losing Everything, Finding Myself. And
Yes.
it's about how you lost your home and your business, and you said it was the best thing that ever happened to you.
About, I don't know, about 10 or 12, probably 12 years ago now, I went through, a really difficult time. I set up a business and then left it to move to Wales. But I wasn't, I'm not a great business person, and I was still financially embroiled without kind of realizing it. And everything went to shit. Um, and we had to sell our house, and there was a lot of debt. And after years of working really, really hard, I kind of had to begin again. I think now is a really difficult time for a lot of people, certainly in the creative industries. It stripped my previous life away, my home was gone, my professional identity was kind of gone, and and so I had to begin again. And that was very exposing. When you lose a kind of shell, you are sort of vulnerable and raw. But it was kind of an opportunity as well because in that sort of 15-year period that I'd been working, I had become, I'd grown as a person. But the work that I was doing and the role that I had, they hadn't particularly changed. And so it was an opportunity for me to, in rebuilding, to rebuild something that was much more aligned with who I am. And who I am is a person that believes fundamentally in creativity and art as a good thing. And I wanted to use my experience, all my experiences, to try and help other people to be more creative. And that became the sort of rationale for everything that I've done subsequently. And I think most people who have survived a difficult time would agree that for all the pain they went through, they have come out a little wiser, with maybe more understanding, maybe more empathy. I think that's certainly true in my case. Uh, and so it's I don't know whether it's any succor for anybody listening who's going through a tough time, but I think it's so important to just to try and keep going, and know that things do change and do get better, and often what you've learned during that period can be a tremendous fuel for what lies ahead.
Thank you. I guess in a way, this has been a creative process because it's created almost like a new part of you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a nice way of seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah. When did the path forward become clear?
Well, there was no sort of epiphany or flash of lightning or light bulb appearing above my head. It was more an unorganic process, I think, that I was quite profoundly affected by that experience, and it then informed decisions that I subsequently took. I came to sort of understand what was going on, and to become more focused really around what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it, and that was the big thing for me. That previously I'd run a creative agency, and we'd made creative and design work for brands all over the world, and my rationale was always to just try and make great creative work, which was fine, and work that had some kind of intrinsic value, but it was a bit flimsy, you know. And now I feel that, in the work that I do, I'm not always successful, but I try to help people, and help people with their creativity, and that to me does feel meaningful, and that sustains me through the difficult times as well.
And you've written about this as well. You've talked a lot about the ikagi. Is that how we pronounce it? The Japanese word that means
Oh
finding
yeah.
your reason for being.
Yes, yeah,
That's
yeah.
something that you use in your work with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So I don't speak Japanese, and I have no better idea how to pronounce it than you do. But I pronounce it ikigai, whether
Ikigai.
it's Nikagi or Ikigai or something altogether
Someone
different.
help us, please.
I'm sure a listener will be able to advise. Yeah, so it's quite a nice way of thinking about your values and trying to align what you do with your values so that you've got a really clear, motivating, meaningful rationale. You ask yourself four questions. You ask, what do I really enjoy doing? What am I really good at? What impact would I like to have on the world? What effect would I like my work to have on the world? And then taking all these three things into account, what could I be paid for? So the fourth
Is
question is
that
a
your
bit more.
last question? Do you have to wait
That's
till the end? Okay.
yeah, I think so. Yeah. So and I think the first three questions are kind of the most important. And so with my clients, often what I'll do is I'll share this model with them. And then they go away and they have a think about responses to these questions. And then in the next session, we talk through them, and sometimes we'll work together on that fourth question, and what sometimes happens is it's not practical to, do something professionally that aligns with those values, maybe at the current time, but it's certainly possible to do things in your life which do align with those values, and so that give you a kind of sustenance.
Yeah.
And I think the principle underpinning Ikigai is that if you have no why or purpose informing what you do, then sustenance, I suppose, is quite a good word. There is no sustenance. It's not nourishing to you to do what you do, and that's not a healthy place to be.
Yeah, and I like this idea of sustenance because it's not going to be sustainable, and therefore at some point
Absolutely.
the wheels may come off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think it accounts for that sort of hollowness or malaise that a lot of people feel.
yeah,
And that's one of the great things about creativity is just having some kind of self-directed creative project can be a way of assuaging that feeling of malaise or hollowness, because you're
yeah,
you're doing something that is true to you, that is about your unique perspective in the world. It helps you. It just feels the act of creation is an act of sort of self-affirmation as well. It's to make something is to say I'm here, and to make something creative is to say I'm here. I feel I have something to say, and I feel I have something to say that I would maybe like to share with the world. And that is a really positive thing, I think.
What an interesting conversation with Richard Holman about confidence and creativity. So many brilliant ideas. I think one of my favourites is the reminder that our constraints can also be our catalysts. This is something we often work on in my coaching room because it's so liberating to stop waiting for more time, more money, more confidence, and learn to work with what you have. That's when you really make progress. This podcast is designed to be practical. I want to actively help you boost your confidence. For that reason, each episode is accompanied by a short Substack post with a tool or an exercise to help you apply the ideas we've explored in your own life. You can find those by subscribing to In Confidence on Substack, and these posts are free for season 1 only. And if you have a question for me or a comment on one of the episodes, or you just want to say hi, you can email dearinconfidence@gmail.com, or you can WhatsApp 07377 231 025. That's all from me. See you next time.